What's good? It's Woog. We have a 130-pound title fight, and we're coming off a weekend where there was a pretty significant upset in Giovanni Santillan defeating Alexis Rocha. And I'm looking at this matchup here, and why don't we just get right into it? O'Shaquie Foster, 20 wins and 2 losses, is defending his WBC Super-Featherweight title against Eduardo Hernandez, 34 wins and 1 loss. O'Shaquie Foster's coming off the biggest moment of his career thus far, and that was capturing the WBC Super Featherweight title in a vacant title fight against former 122 and 126 pound champion Rey Vargas. This was Rey Vargas's first fight as he was stepping up to 130 to contend for that vacant WBC belt so he could hopefully become a 3-division champion. Now, that WBC belt is one of the 2 belts that Shakur Stevenson lost on the scale before his fight with Robson Conceição, just before he then went up to 135. And in that fight between Rey Vargas and O'Shaquie Foster, Rey Vargas was a pretty significant favorite, and a lot of people thought that O'Shaquie Foster was a live dog. I still picked Rey Vargas via very, very close decision, but O'Shaquie Foster looked very good. I mean, he boxed well. He wasn't really backing up. He was standing his ground, which is important if you're a sweet scientist style fighter. I always say that if you're fighting a pressure guy and you're kind of a negative style fighter, you've got to, at some point in the fight, plant your feet a bit and start pushing the bully or the pressure fighter back. Because if you think that you're going to just keep on moving for the entirety of the 12 rounds and not slow down, not lessen in sharpness, and that this pressure fighter is not going to catch up to you by the middle and late rounds, well, you've got another thing coming. So you've got to actually plant your flag in the sand at a point, because naturally you're not going to move as fluidly and be as sharp, elusive, and so forth once you start fatiguing getting into the middle and late rounds. And Rey Vargas is a guy who throws a ton of punches, but O'Shaquie Foster was throwing the crisper punches. He was good defensively, and he was so good at counterpunching and throwing these straight shots that Rey Vargas's punch output and volume decreased. I wasn't used to seeing Rey Vargas that confused in the past, but yeah, O'Shaquie Foster won a unanimous decision to capture that 130-pound title. So this is his first title defense, and he's fighting a guy who, some might not be familiar with. It's Eduardo Hernandez, and no, he doesn't have a big name, but he used to fight for Golden Boy a few years ago. Then he was with Pro Bellum. Pro Bellum is now, I believe, defunct, and so he had a contract dispute, was trying to get out of that Pro Bellum situation. I remember Regis Prograis for some time was with Pro Bellum as well, and they were looking kind of promising before the whole MTK Global thing just blew up, and any association with MTK Global was going to blow up as well. And it seems like Pro Bellum fell victim to that. But I feel like there's like the tendency when we see a fighter have a big moment and then become a name, like O'Shaquie Foster by beating Rey Vargas, now he's on the map, right? Even though he had a very good win before that, which we're going to get to, against the southpaw Muhammad Kuja Yakubov. But there's a tendency once somebody hits the map, like when Mauricio Lara came out of nowhere and knocked out Josh Warrington, or when Luis Alberto Lopez, upset Josh Warrington, those types of moments, then we look at that fighter who just had the big moment as being certified, right? Okay, boom, there's your stamp of approval, essentially. Well, with O'Shaquie Foster, being that he's a champ and he's going to be defending his title against somebody who most probably haven't heard of, I feel like there's a tendency to go with the champ. Like he's the one with the belt, right? He's the one with this shiny thing, so he's probably going to win this fight against somebody who we haven't heard of. But I remember, for instance, when Emmanuel Navarrete was about to have what turned out being his final featherweight fight against Eduardo Baez, I was looking at Baez's, track record, his past fights, and I'm like, Eduardo Baez might be a bit of a problem, at least in the early rounds against Navarrete. And he in fact was a problem against Navarrete. Navarrete ended up finishing him to the body. But the point being, just like with Giovanni Santillan last weekend, I mean, everybody knew who Alexis Rocha was going into that fight. I was going to go to that fight too. It was right here in Inglewood, California, a couple cities down. And I was watching that fight on DAZN, and I'm like, oh man, why didn't I go to that fight? But point being, don't sleep on the B side just because of the B side or have a lesser name. The name often is attached with opportunity. If you had the opportunity to fight Ray Vargas, then that gave you the opportunity to be known to a bigger swath of the boxing community. But it doesn't take too much to look at Eduardo Hernandez, look at his fight style, look at his style of punching, look at his tenacity, look at how he kind of disguises his punches. I mean, he'll be the first to tell you that he is a quintessential Mexican style fighter, which I think is a lazy phrase at times as well, because, some people are, head down, just start throwing punches, come forward, sustain pressure. Some Mexican fighters do that, but then you've got others like Virgil Ortiz, David Benavidez, Canelo Alvarez. Like, you've got a lot of Mexican fighters who fight with a lot more technique than I feel is associated with that phrase Mexican style. I feel like when people say that, they're almost expecting like a Jorge Arce, somebody who just comes in guns blazing and just stays in your grill at you. Orlando Salido, you get what I'm saying? But Eduardo Hernandez fancies himself a Mexican style fighter, but watching him, I'm looking at some of his feints and some of his disguises and some of his punch sequences, and I see a lot of sophistication in his arsenal, in his attack. Yes, he is throwing a lot of punches. Yes, he is throwing a lot of hard punches. And by the way, I don't know if I've seen anybody who is so uppercut happy as Eduardo Hernandez is in some of his fights. Like, the guy will throw lead uppercuts with either hand. Sometimes he'll throw like 3 uppercuts in a row. It's kind of weird. And they're pretty accurate. I mean, sometimes he'll throw them from way outside range and he'll miss by a mile. But often he's landing with some of these kind of weird combinations. I remember, like, if you look at his fight from November of 2020 against Eduardo Garza, this was on, Ring City, USA. And, one of the people on the call was Sean Porter. Sean Porter was like tripping out because of this guy's punch sequencing. But he stayed committed to this and ended up breaking Eduardo Garza down, finishing him to the body. And this was supposed to be a pretty competitive fight. It didn't look very competitive when you saw them going at it. So, look, in sizing up O'Shaquie Foster versus Eduardo Hernandez, first of all, O'Shaquie Foster, I mean, he did lose 2 fights early in his career when he was coming up. And I'm talking like 8-rounders. He lost a unanimous decision to Samuel Tea, and he lost a split decision to Rolando Chinea. And these losses took place way back in 2015, 2016. Eduardo Hernandez has 1 loss, and it was a knockout loss to Roger Gutierrez. That's the guy who Hector Garcia beat for the title. And Hernandez has fought 6 times since and won all of those fights via stoppage. In fact, if you look at this guy's knockout ratio, out of his 34 wins, 31 have come via knockout. So, can O'Shaquie Foster stand his ground against Eduardo Hernandez? O'Shaquie Foster, he's not looked at as being a power puncher, but like when he fought Miguel Roman, that was just before his fight against Yakubov, he finished Roman in the 9th round of a 10-round fight. And in that fight against Yakubov, which I would say through 7 or 8 rounds, it was ultra competitive. Like, to me, it was difficult to tell who was winning that fight. Like, yes, O'Shaquie Foster has like very good balance, and he'll throw a very nice, sharp, straight jab, hard jab too. He'll throw a nice little, like a laser of a right hand. It's not like a knock you out cold type of right hand, but his base is pretty wide, and he's got the, shoulders that are broad enough to kind of pick off some of those punches. Like Teofimo Lopez kind of has like a broad set of shoulders. So O'Shaquie Foster isn't a ultra powerful puncher, but he's a strong fighter, physically strong, and he does a thing where, he's very good at managing range. So he'll jab you as soon as he's in range, and if you start pressing him too much or he starts getting a little too close to the ropes, he'll do that low step in where you run into his shoulder, and it's basically his way of kind of backing you up off of him, re-establishing space so then he can circle out, bring the fight back closer to the center of the ring. He's very tactical when it comes to handling guys who are coming in hot, basically. Like, you might get a shot or 2 off, but he's not just going to stand there in close range and let you break him off with combinations. A lot of Eduardo Hernandez's opponents succumb to that pressure, and they end up kind of trapped in the phone booth with him while he just lets off with 3 to 5 punches at a time. I just don't see him having those same opportunities against O'Shaquie Foster with his style. Not to mention the fact that he's got like a slight height advantage and he's got a significant reach advantage. We're talking 72 inches to 68 inches. 72 inches is the same reach as Errol Spence Jr. and it's the same reach as Floyd Mayweather. And keep in mind, O'Shaquie Foster is fighting at 130 with a Floyd Mayweather Errol Spence reach. So he makes it work for him. Again, he's very good at managing range. He's not an ultra fast mover. Like, he doesn't have that Pernell Whitaker like reflex. I mean, barely anybody ever has had Pernell Whitaker like reflexes, but he is good at rolling with shots. He's not the type of person who's going to stand right in front of you and make you miss with 2 to 3 shots. Like, you'll get a glove on him, but again, he's often rolling with the punches. So he's good at anticipating what's coming at him. Now, sometimes if you throw just like a boom, straight right hand, you might catch him. You could snap his head back with some stuff. He does get caught, but chances are he's not going to be getting caught with your best artillery. Although he did eat some nice left hands from Yakubov in that fight. Again, it was very competitive until O'Shaquie Foster started to pull away late in the fight. And again, he dropped Yakubov in the final round. So he's a very strong finisher to fights, even though, again, he's moving early in the fight. So you're going to have to come chase him a bit, and he'll move laterally and front and back. So he can move this dimension and this dimension pretty well. He dips a little bit, but he doesn't really exercise too much of that dimension unless, again, he's stepping in to smother your punches if you're pursuing him. So I think that the first thing that Hernandez is going to have to figure out is how to start cutting the ring off and trying to trap O'Shaquie Foster to where he could break him off with some punches. I think that he'll have some success in doing so, especially when the fight gets into the 4th, 5th, and 6th round. I don't think that O'Shaquie Foster, say Foster wins like the first 2 of 3 rounds, I think that he's going to have a difficult time in rounds 4 through 6, and that's when the moment of truth will have to be revealed. Will O'Shaquie Foster, at that point where movement or at least the same type of elusiveness and movement is no longer an option, can he then stand his ground and start backing Hernandez up a bit with his power and his arsenal? If not, Eduardo Hernandez could very well win this one. Maybe he stops O'Shaquie Foster. I don't think he does, even though, again, 31 knockouts out of his 34 wins. But I think that O'Shaquie Foster will at least make it the distance. But whether or not he's able to stand his ground and start demonstratively kind of, putting a bit of a beating on Eduardo Hernandez can win this one via decision. This fight is taking place in Cancun, Mexico. So this is going to be a raucous crowd, which I imagine is going to be backing the hell out of Eduardo Hernandez. And I'm actually surprised that, O'Shaquie Foster agreed to a fight in Mexico when it's Foster who's defending his title. So you're going to have a crowd that's going to be reacting, I believe, to just about everything Eduardo Hernandez does. So I think that O'Shaquie Foster is going to have to win this one by like a couple rounds in terms of what the viewing audience is going to be watching. He's going to have to noticeably win this fight, because I think that if this ends up being a could go either way type of affair, Eduardo Hernandez could very well win this one. So yeah, this could be a bit of a trap fight for O'Shaquie Foster. I would not be surprised if Eduardo Hernandez wins this one. Again, he's got a lot of power. He's got kind of a tricky style of throwing punches, and he throws a lot of punches. O'Shaquie Foster is going to have to do something to reduce that punch output, that punch volume. O'Shaquie Foster will also often switch from orthodox to southpaw. He did it a lot against Yakubov, did it to a lesser degree, but he did it against Ray Vargas as well, though not nearly as much as he was. He probably fought more than 50% of the fight from the southpaw stance against Yakubov. But again, a lot of that was pretty much just a bit of course correction because Yakubov himself is a southpaw. But if you look at like the Foster versus Hernandez odds here, they're not the same type of lopsided odds that you would normally get with a champion who some more have heard of than the challenger. But Foster is like only a minus 175 and Eduardo Hernandez is like a plus 158. So the boxing market, if you will, sees this as being a very competitive fight. I'm having difficulty on picking a winner here. Going into the vid, I was highly considering going Eduardo Hernandez via decision. look, especially if O'Shaquie Foster is kind of on a, hey, I just want a title type of hangover, which does happen. So again, he's going into quote unquote enemy territory here. He's coming off of the glow of winning the WBC title against Ray Vargas. So if there's any slippage, Eduardo Hernandez wins this fight. But I'm going to give O'Shaquie Foster the benefit of the doubt when it comes to preparation, when it comes to professionalism, when it comes to discipline. If you look at his, his life and how he got into boxing, getting into trouble early, finding boxing and staying very disciplined. If you check out his demeanor, just his personality type and, his camp, his corner and how he approaches the sport, he seems like the consummate professional. I think he's going to come here prepared. I think he knows what's at stake. He knows where this fight is taking place. He knows that this guy that he's fighting against is coming to win and is coming with a hell of a punch, super high knockout ratio. And he's got to know, O'Shaquie Foster has to know that everything that he just worked for, boom, could go in an instant. Again, Alexis Rocha was not a champion, but he had the reputation going into that fight last weekend against Giovanni Santillan. I mean, they had sparred a lot of times in the past. He knew who he was fighting and what was at stake, and Santillan still took it to him and finished him in the middle rounds. I don't think that this fight between Foster and Hernandez, as hard as Hernandez punches, I don't think that this fight is going to end via stoppage. I mean, look, if O'Shaquie Foster goes in against this, again, lesser known, but I see to be high quality opponent and finishes him, that would be pretty damn impressive. But I'm going to go O'Shaquie Foster via very close and competitive decision win. One of those split decision or majority decision, one of those where it takes for the last scorecard to be read and for the name to be announced, either the and new or and still. I think we're going to have one of those moments. I think it could be a split decision, and I think that there could be like a 115, 113 scorecard, something like that in the mix. I wouldn't be totally surprised if Eduardo Hernandez scores a knockdown. Again, his way of punching is pretty, it's a lot. It's a handful. And O'Shaquie Foster, again, he's a good defensive fighter, but I could see him being surprised, maybe in the early rounds and maybe a flash knockdown to where O'Shaquie Foster then has to win the vast majority of the rounds going forward to secure and retain his title. But I'm going to go with O'Shaquie Foster via very close decision over Eduardo Rocky Hernandez. Let me know your thoughts on this 130-pound clash. And also, where do you see O'Shaquie Foster stacking up against the other champions or belt holders in the division? Like, how do you think O'Shaquie Foster would do against Joe Cordina? O'Shaquie Foster recently signed with DAZN. So, look, I almost feel like there's a lot of the makings of an upset. Like, he just signed the big deal, right? So, he had fought Ray Vargas on PBC, on Showtime this year, but he just signed the deal with Matchroom. So he's got that going for him. Newly, minted champion. I just feel like there's a lot that can happen in terms of just taking your foot off the gas and taking your eye off the ball just a little bit. And it only takes a little bit. But yeah, how do you, I'm still going Foster via close decision, but how would you see Foster faring against Joe Cordina, also with Matchroom, or the other two belt holders in the division, Hector Garcia and who I see to be the best in the division, Emmanuel Navarrete? And it's funny, after that fight with Liam Wilson, I'm like, hey, maybe 130 ain't right for Emmanuel Navarrete. And then he has that performance against Oscar Valdez. And then I'm like, let me just shut up. You know what I mean? But yeah, let me know where you see O'Shaquie Foster stacking up against the other champions. Do you think that he's somebody who is one of those, hey, I was lucky to get a belt, but not a like true champion? Or do you think that there's some legs to this title reign? And do you think he will have some successful title defenses? And do you think that he could ever go up to 135 and be a multiple division champion? He's still relatively young. He's 30 years old, so he's got a few years to work with. How good do you think O'Shaquie Foster is? And who do you see winning between Foster and Eduardo Rocky Hernandez? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.